Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Tuesday, the 17th of February. I'm Caroline Hepker in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Brussels. Coming up today, American and Iranian negotiators meet as Donald Trump warns of consequences if Tehran doesn't make a deal.
Geneva also plays host to another round of talks between Ukraine and Russia, with little hope of progress towards the US deadline for a peace deal by June.
Plus, the era of AI-powered weapons. Bloomberg learns that SpaceX and XAI are competing for a Pentagon contract for autonomous drone technology.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Two high-profile sets of negotiations are taking place in Geneva today. The US and Iran are holding a second round of nuclear talks. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says he's hopeful Tehran and Washington can broker an agreement. On Air Force One, President Trump says he'll be following the talks with Iran.
So I'll be involved in those talks indirectly, and they'll be very important, and we'll see what can happen. I mean, it's been typically, Iran's a very tough negotiator. I think they want to make a deal. I don't think they want the consequences of not making a deal. They want to make a deal.
President Trump has threatened to strike the Islamic Republic unless it agrees to a deal curbing its nuclear program and has moved forces to the region. Tehran has begun conducting military drills around the Strait of Hormuz, according to the Tasnim news agency. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi held talks with the head of the UN's atomic watchdog on Monday, but facing pressure, he said in a social media post there would be no submission before threats.
Expectations are low for any breakthrough on discussions to end the war in Ukraine in Geneva. Western officials and analysts say that President Vladimir Putin believes time is on his side and support for Ukraine will peter out. The spokesperson for President Putin, Dmitry Peskov, says that Russia is taking the talk seriously.
This time we intend to discuss a broader range of issues related to the territories and other matters connected to our demands. The presence of the chief negotiator, that is Medinsky, is now essential. Indeed, the delegation will now be expanded this time. In addition to Medinsky, Deputy Foreign Minister Galuzin and other officials will be there.
Dmitry Peskov there speaking via a translator. Russia has for months repeatedly struck Ukrainian cities, leaving hundreds of thousands of people without power in a bid to bring the country to its knees. But Bloomberg analysis suggests that the war's human and economic cost to Russia is stark. Both sides say that any potential progress today would need to be agreed by their leaders before it was accepted.
In earnings news this morning, BHP's bumper copper profits are accelerating a shift away from iron ore. The miner posted earnings close to the upper end of analyst expectations after a years-long effort to shore up copper production. According to the firm's CFO, Vandita Pant, BHP is set to boost its offering of the red metal even further.
For the first time, 50%, more than just about 50% of our earnings, EBITDA, came from copper, and performance across our assets has been very good. To take example of Escondida, which is our largest mine that we run in Chile, we are revising the guidance up for this year and next year.
BHP's Vandita Pant speaking there after the latest earnings announcement. Following the news, BHP shares jumped by as much as 7.6% in Sydney to hit a record, their biggest gain in over 10 months.
Bloomberg has learnt that Elon Musk's SpaceX is competing in a US military contest to produce autonomous drones. The company and its subsidiary XAI are hoping to break into the weapons sector by winning a secretive $100 million contest to build voice-activated drones. The news comes as Anthropic's talks about extending a contract with the Pentagon are being held up. Bloomberg understands the company wants guardrails that prevent Claude from being used to develop weapons or spy on Americans. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has praised Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban during a visit to Budapest. The US is doubling down on its support for the populist leader as the country prepares for elections next month. Speaking in Budapest, Rubio said that President Trump would provide assistance to Hungary if it ever ran into financial trouble. He said the two countries are entering a golden era of relations.
I can say to you with confidence that President Trump is deeply committed to your success, because your success is our success. Because this relationship we have here in Central Europe through you is so essential and vital for our national interests in the years to come.
Marco Rubio speaking there after President Trump gave his personal endorsement of Orban this month, despite the Prime Minister's party trailing in opinion polls in Hungary.
The executive chairman of Hyatt Hotels, Tom Pritzker, said he's retiring from his position at the company and won't stand for re-election to its board. Pritzker cited an association with the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein and his partner Ghislaine Maxwell. In a statement, he said he, quote, exercised terrible judgment in maintaining contact with them and feels deep sorrow for the pain they inflicted on their victims. Hyatt named its president and CEO, Mark Hoplamazian, to succeed Pritzker as chairman, effective immediately.
And those are our top stories for you this morning. Looking at the market, so Nasdaq futures this morning are currently down by 0.8%. The US is back from the President's Day holiday yesterday. Asian stocks very thin trading there because of the Lunar New Year holiday, but the MSCI Asia Pacific Index is down 0.1%. The AI concerns have hit India's technology services industry. They also caused Dassault Systems and Siemens shares to edge lower yesterday in European trading. Treasuries edging high, yields sliding 2.5 basis points. Oil prices, Brent crude, steady with those US-Iran talks and the kind of concerns around geopolitics. Brent crude actually down 0.6%, $68.24 the barrel. We do have a lot of data out today. You've got German CPI, the ZEW economic survey, as well as UK jobs data today. So those are the markets.
Well, in a moment, we'll bring you more on the flurry of diplomatic activity happening in Geneva today, looking at both Iran but also the war, Russia's war in Ukraine as well. But before we get to that, I want to mention another story that we've been reading this morning. A reflection on how much the world has changed since the era of lean in and girl boss. Alice Robb's been writing about the new wave of books by women about their relationship with work and how they're focusing on the pleasures of giving up, the likes of A Year of Nothing, Life After Ambition and Exit Interview. Look at the excesses of hustle culture that were epitomised by Sheryl Sandberg's manual, which sold millions of copies in the 2010s. The newer volumes are focused on a more harsher reality, dealing with workplace sexism, balancing pregnancy and motherhood with demanding jobs. And Alice writes that there is something to celebrate in a re-evaluation of ambition, but warns against a kind of what she describes as regressive defeatism, that the noxious message that hardworking women are suckers or dupes. This, of course, particularly concerning given the data that's showing women are pulling back from professional ambitions, the gender wage gap is widening in the US, and that more American women are leaving the workforce.
Yeah, look, this really speaks to me, this story, because Sandberg's book came out when I was in the US, and I just remember the frenzy around that book. She was a leading woman saying to women, the sky's the limit for your ambitions. And frankly, it was then, and perhaps still is now, a threatening idea to many. And so the criticism at the time was that Sandberg was sort of blind to the systemic issues that her own readers were facing. Now, Stephen, it feels like the pendulum is surely swinging very far in the opposite direction. Women, sadly, but increasingly doubt that they can get promoted at work, and somehow sort of child rearing is the solution. I mean, frankly, people should have more choices all round, not fewer.
Yeah, I mean, the really, as part that stuck with me is from this piece that Alice writes, RIP the exception of 2013 to 2020. Hopefully, the future isn't quite as bleak as that, but it's a very interesting reflection on how, I suppose, the books are being written about this, which gives an indication of where the conversation is around it. But it's certainly a stark difference to where things were even 10 years ago.
Right, let's think about the geopolitics then today. We've got 2 rounds of key talks taking place in Geneva. Firstly, between Iran and the US, and secondly, the latest round of peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, also brokered by the United States. The US president says that he thinks that Iran wants to make a deal. Let's bring in our Middle East breaking news editor, Patrick Sykes, for more on this. Patrick, how much pressure is Iran under then to come to an agreement with the US, given the American military build-up in the region, the threat of airstrikes, but then Iran also moving on its part?
Yeah, absolutely. That military build-up, the first aircraft carrier that we know is already in the region, and the second one that we understand is on the way as of a couple of days ago. That is the main stick as of now in the US's hand, and the Iranians will remember only a few months back in June, in the middle of the last time the two sides met for negotiations before this current round, that those talks were interrupted by Israel striking and then the US ultimately joining. So they don't think it's a bluff, but at the same time, they have seen in recent weeks Trump break his promise to intervene in Iran if Iran killed protesters. So they may also be calculating that, Trump isn't that willing to use that force, or is perhaps looking to use it in a more measured way. I think that'll also be part of the calculus in Tehran.
What about the question around the nuclear issues and where compromises could be found between the US and Iranian positions?
Yeah, there are some quantitative sides to the program that hopefully we could see some movement on. One is the kind of level to which Iran enriches, plus 60% enrichment we've seen, which most say that is just unnecessary for a peaceful nuclear program. You've got things like the number of centrifuges, although we know that a lot of that equipment was damaged in that June war. And then the other big unknown is the location, the exact whereabouts and the status of this stockpile Iran has of highly enriched uranium. Perhaps we could see that taken abroad temporarily, permanently. It remains to be seen. Some compromise on that might be a way forward. But Iran is insisting for now that they're only talking about the nuclear issue. And I think a big test of the staying power of these talks will be, does it remain so, or does it broaden out?
Yeah, indeed. Meanwhile, Israel also wants limits put on Iran's ballistic missiles. We know there were recent meetings, and there are frequent meetings between Israel's leadership and the US. Do you think that is likely, that Israel's view will be taken into account by the US?
Yeah, from Israel's perspective, it makes sense, right? That is the main threat, and they've been targeted by those missiles most recently in that June war. And there's also a big question mark about, how ready they would be for another round of that kind of conflict, because it depends on the number of interceptors that they have and so on, about which we don't have clear data. For Iran, that is a real red line. This is a sort of mentality that goes back to the war with Iraq in the 80s. Where many countries were arming Iraq against Iran, and ever since then they've really invested heavily in this domestic missile program. Therefore, if we were to see any movement on that, which we haven't yet, but if we were to see any movement from Iran on that, that would be a sign of a big concession, I think, and okay. The US would be seizing on that.
All right, Patrick, thanks very much for joining us. Patrick Sykes there, our Middle East breaking news editor. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this.
Well, also in Geneva today, the US brokered peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Bloomberg's Tony Halpin, who leads our team covering Russia, joins us now for more. Tony, the Russia-Ukraine talks are happening as we're approaching 4 years since the start of Moscow's full-scale invasion. Are there any hopes for progress?
Good morning. Well, this is the third round of trilateral talks. There were two in Abu Dhabi, which focused largely on technical military details of any potential ceasefire. But we're told that today's talks, which will go over 2 days, are focused more on broader issues, including the question of territory, which remains the hardest one to resolve. Russia is pushing hard for Ukraine to surrender territory that Moscow has never occupied, and Ukraine is resisting that, saying it needs to have that territory as a safeguard and a defense for the country, and that it's its own territory to begin with, and Russia has no demands on it. US is trying to mediate some kind of resolution there, but so far they haven't come up with a form of words that will satisfy either side.
Does the US have much leverage to put pressure on either side to meet that June deadline?
Yes, I mean, this is a deadline effectively set by the US. I mean, neither Ukraine nor Russia has signed up to it, though, of course, Ukraine in particular has said it wants the war to end as soon as possible. The leverage the US has is clearly they're not supplying weapons directly to Ukraine anymore, but they're supplying weapons that Europeans buy for Ukraine. They could also increase the sanctions pressure on Russia to force some kind of concession there from Vladimir Putin. But President Trump doesn't seem much inclined to raise the pressure on Russia. His most recent comments were saying that effectively it's Ukraine that has to come to the table and make a deal, even though it's basically the victim in this war.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.